He secretly married another woman, and the moment I saw that photo, my hands went numb and the room turned gray. But the thing he didn't know about me? That secret flipped everything on its head. If you love jaw-dropping true stories, hit subscribe. I've got one for you. We weren't perfect, but we were 3 years deep in a life somebody might call ordinary, and somebody else might call sacred. Sunday mornings meant pancakes that burned sometimes and his laugh filling the kitchen. We talked about a house with a wraparound porch, about how we'd host Christmas with all the mismatched plates my grandmother gave me, how we'd one day have little shoes lined up at the door. He had that easy smile, the kind that made you feel like you were the safest place on earth. I still remember the way the sunlight used to hit his cheek when he read aloud the same passages from the cheap poetry book we fought over. Those were the soft things I clung to when the hard signs started showing up. The warning signs were small at first. A call he stepped out to take and came back guarded. A business trip that kept multiplying in length. The phone tucked face down beside him at night. Little lies, like the ones that look harmless until you start seeing the pattern. It's work. It's nothing. I'll make it up to you. I told myself I didn't want to be the woman who turned every late night into a catastrophe. I wanted to be trusting, to give him room. Love, I told myself, is not an inventory of receipts and alibis, but denial has teeth, and it eats at you an inch at a time. Then one afternoon, a notification blinked on my phone from someone I barely spoke to anymore. Christina, a mutual friend. She'd been to a wedding, apparently. A single photo. A caption full of exclamation points and M-joys. I opened it because everyone opens those things. The hell that followed took less than 3 seconds. There he was. Tux. Tight hand at her waist. A kiss that looked like a promise. The background? A sunlit garden, glass chandeliers, flower petals frozen mid-fall. The woman's name was Jennifer, and the tag said Mr. and Mrs. For a moment, my rational brain did what it does when it's trying to save you from collapse. It said, "This is a mistake. Some identical twin. A Photoshop prank." Then a second photo slid into view. Him holding a little white cake knife beside the woman, smiling like a man who'd just crossed an ocean to get to shore. 3 months earlier, someone had posted engagement photos of them. 3 months. My hands shook. My mouth went dry. I felt like I'd been punched through the chest even though nothing physically touched me. The phone blurred. The corners of the room softened. That first wave was pure, dizzy disbelief. And then something else happened. A familiar part of me I rarely let out woke up. The detective. The child who made lists. The woman who had learned to read the spaces between words. I screenshot everything. I wrote down dates. I traced the timestamps like they were constellations leading to a truth. Why would he? Where did Jennifer come from? Were our plans all words he'd used to grease his way forward? I'd been with him when he said, "Someday." I'd stacked my mornings and nights and quiet promises into a house that only existed as a fantasy, because that's what the two of us had been building. Together, I thought. I started to look closer at his business trips. 3 months of calendar blocks labeled just work that now read to me like chapters in a secret book I'd never been allowed to open. Photos of hotels he'd told me were venues for meetings, receipts for floral shops I'd never seen. A message he'd sent me late one night. Innocent words, but typed from a device he later forgot to sync, had metadata that placed him in a city where the wedding had taken place. People we both knew had been there. Friends who'd liked those photos were friends who didn't send me a single text. They scrolled, double-tapped, laughed behind closed screens, and said nothing to the woman they claimed to care about. You ever realize in a split second how many people can be complicit in a lie without ever saying a thing? That truth landed on me like ice. I called Christina. Her voice was too light. "It was beautiful," she said. "You should have been there." I heard an apology that was more of an afterthought than a comfort. Later I learned she'd been one of the ones who posted the pictures. She wrote, "Congrats," and sprinkled hearts, but she didn't send a private message that said, "Are you okay?" She didn't. Neither did the others. They stayed silent until the photos made the silence deafening. Then grief arrived in waves, each one different. Denial softened into fury, sharp, animal. I wanted to scream, to break something, to call the woman and demand answers. Bargaining flickered. Maybe if I'd been more, whatever, then. Depression showed up like thick fog, making the simplest tasks feel like climbing. But there was a pivot point hidden inside that fog, a line I stepped over without realizing at first. It was the moment when I stopped imagining what I'd lost in terms of him and started imagining what I could gain in terms of me. And the phone rang. Mr. Thompson, my grandmother's lawyer. You don't prepare for the sound of a voice that will flip your whole narrative. Mr. Thompson had been my grandmother's lawyer for years, a quiet man who smoothed his words like silk. He asked if I could come into the office. I told him I was out, tired, wounded. He said he needed to see me in person. The office smelled faintly of coffee and paper. He offered me a seat and a glass of water that did nothing for the dryness in my throat. His hands tapped the folder between us. He cleared his throat and said, "Your grandmother was a very private woman. She left instructions that you are to be notified in person." I remember laughing because the absurdity of life often makes me laugh. Then I listened. He slid an envelope across the desk, and my name was on a letter in her looping script. It read more like a conversation than a legal document. She wrote about the apricots she dried on the back porch, about working double shifts and sewing hems until 2 in the morning, about bank accounts and certificates tucked away with the stubbornness of someone planning for a future they would never see. She'd kept things, small and steady at first, coins in the mattress, nickels saved in jars, then moved to smarter, quieter things. Investments. A trust. Your grandmother wanted you to have independence, Mr. Thompson said. She set up a trust that becomes available to you on your 30th birthday. He told me the words, trust, estate, access at 30, but my ears filled with the music of each sentence. The way she had whispered to herself while threading a needle, the way she had paused at the market to pinch pennies and dream in secret. I asked the question you always feel foolish asking, how much? He was careful. More than you imagined, he said. There are liquid assets and long-term holdings. There are, yes, millions if that's the way you want to hear it. But more importantly, stability. Options. Hearing millions out loud felt unreal, and in a way, wrong. It was as if a private thing that had been generational and discreet had been translated into some loud currency the world respects. But I learned then what my grandmother had known. Money doesn't have to be flashy to be powerful. She'd built a ladder and tucked it behind her sewing machine for me to climb later. I walked out of that office with the letter folded in my wallet and my head spinning in a new direction. My 30th birthday was only months away. There were strings attached, standard trustee oversight, allocations, things Mr. Thompson explained slowly, but none of them felt like chains. Instead, each stipulation felt like a promise that the freedom my grandmother had bought with discreet thrift and quiet resolve would be kept sacred. When I told Michael, I didn't do it as confession or trump card. I told him the way you tell the weather, plainly, without elaboration. He was there on a Saturday afternoon, wearing the same sweater he wore when he wanted to look casual and important at once. He smiled the smile that had once made me lift my shoulders and breathe. "It's true?" he asked. "It's true," I said. "My grandmother left me a trust. I'll have access at 30. He came closer like a moth to light. "That's amazing, Tash," he said. "I'm so proud of you." Proud. Those 4 simple syllables took on new weight in a world where you can hear them once and decide that's the life you want. I could see it in his eyes, a little math happening behind the smile. I told myself I was imagining it. Maybe I was. Maybe I wanted to be generous. But every time I tried to give him the benefit of the doubt, there was always that one little thing that didn't add up. Then the Instagram photos appeared, and all that small arithmetic turned into a ledger of truth. Michael's return after the wedding was predictably theatrical. He called first, tentative, like he'd lost something important. He came to the apartment with the old rhythm of familiarity, but the air between us was a foreign place. He tried to fold himself back into the life we'd mapped out, as if lines on a paper could be erased by familiarity. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen like this," he said, and I could have believed him if it weren't for the ring on his finger and the photos that had already replaced any explanation. "You mean the wedding?" I asked. He sighed like a man admitting to a misdemeanor. It wasn't what it looked like. It was complicated. Complicated. Isn't that the polite word we give to things that are actually selfish and cowardly? He wanted an anchor, and a port, and a safety net. He wanted his cake and the vanilla frosting of social status without the work of love. He assumed I would be a convenient afterthought, a woman who would let him have the comfort of both a wife and a backup plan. And here's the part that still makes my skin prickle. He offered me a version of us that guaranteed his comfort. "Stay with me," he said once, voice low, almost pleading. "We can make this work. I can be with you while I figure things out." That sentence landed like a slap. Figure things out is a phrase designed to degrade someone slowly while preserving the other person's ego. I looked at him and felt no tenderness. I felt something like pity, the kind you get for someone who's trapped by his own cowardice. "Did you expect me to wait?" I asked. He tried to remold the story. "You don't understand how complicated relationships are." "It's not that I don't understand," I said. "It's that I understand exactly what this is. You married her. That's not somewhere between. That's a line you crossed." I'd rehearsed this moment in my head in 1,000 different cadences. Yelling, pleading, cold detachment. None of that felt honest in real time. The truth always felt simpler. "I can't be your second," I said. "I won't be your insurance policy." He blinked like someone trying to translate a word in a foreign language. "But I love you." If loving you meant buying the house you imagined while marrying someone else, I realized love had a very odd dictionary. His love smelled of convenience, of someone who wanted a place in both worlds and didn't see the cruelty in that. Here's the twist everyone once whispered like some dramatic reveal. I hadn't told him about the trust before the photos. That sounds like a revenge move, but it wasn't. It was strategy, self-preservation. I had been carrying a secret that was about my future, not his. Telling him early would have given him the chance to do precise arithmetic and plan. I wanted to see what he would do without knowing the exact shape of my options. I wanted to know if the man I loved chose me when there was nothing tangible to gain. That admission, me telling him I'd known about the trust before his wedding photos, was a turning point in the room. He slumped like a man who expected to be rewarded for his duplicity. "You had that and you still," he faltered. "I had it," I said quietly. "And I waited because I wanted to know if you were around for me and not for the lifestyle. There is a particular freedom in telling someone plainly what you have and choosing not to use it as a weapon." I could have announced the inheritance with fanfare. I could have thrown money in his face and laughed. But that would have made me petty and him a punchline. My grandmother taught different lessons. The secret she left me was not a sword. It was a key. I left him then. No scene, no dramatic slamming of doors. I walked out of that apartment holding my dignity like a small, resistant flame. I didn't need to burn his house down. I needed to build one for myself. The first months after were messy and oddly quiet. The initial adrenaline of betrayal softened into the granular work of rebuilding. I read business plans late into the night by lamplight, scribbling ideas in a notebook with a pen my grandmother had once used to jot grocery lists. I met with architects and small business advisors, people who spoke in blueprints and budgets and feasibility studies. I kept Mr. Thompson on a short line. He was precise and unfussy and let me ask all the ridiculous questions no one else would. I used the trust the way my grandmother had intended, as the scaffolding for a life I could stand on. It funded a studio where I launched a business that took all the stubbornness I'd inherited and turned it into something that could be shared, not hoarded. I hired local artists, trained young people in my neighborhood who had ideas but no networks, and built something that honored the way my grandmother managed to be both thrifty and visionary. Money, in this sense, was a tool for labor that fed souls, not vanity. 6 months later, the house with the wraparound porch, our old one-day dream, wasn't his or hers. It was mine. I painted the porch the color my grandmother used on her shutters. I put up lights that twinkled like small moons at night. The new place smelled of lemon oil and freshly cut wood. There were mornings when I drank coffee there in a robe, and sometimes new friends came with croissants and plans. I took a trip to Paris and fumbled through a few lopsided phrases of French at tiny bistros, and laughed at myself when I mixed up merci and s'il vous plaît in the sweetest way. The road trips I'd always deferred now felt possible. I learned how to be alone without feeling empty. And romance? It arrived without fanfare, in the form of a man who loved me for the person I had become because of this journey, not despite it. He didn't show up with grand declarations or possessive promises. He showed up with patience and humor and an eagerness to read my bookshelves. He loved the way my grandmother's old recipes smelled of cardamom, and he laughed at my jokes even when they weren't funny. That, for me, was the truest measure. Not public performance, not theatrical shows of devotion, just steady companionship. As for Michael and Jennifer, I don't believe in reveling in someone else's misfortune. I will say what I observed. Marriages built on convenience often fracture under the weight of real living. People who marry for what a person can provide rather than who a person is eventually find the gifts they thought they received have strings. I've heard through the neighborhood grapevine, nothing malicious, just neighborhood chatter, that their relationship looked as precarious as a house of cards. But that's for them to navigate. My life's not about tallying their failures. What I did in the end felt less like revenge and more like a quiet reclamation. My grandmother's secret gave me options. My choices gave me freedom. Freedom doesn't need to be loud. It simply lets you breathe differently. I want to be clear about something important. The fact that I walked away with financial independence does not make the betrayal hurt any less. Money didn't fix the nights I cried, or the lost future I'd pictured at the kitchen table. But it gave me what I needed to move toward a future of my choosing, instead of waiting for permission from someone who had already chosen otherwise. That, to me, was grace and strategy braided together. There were people who judged me, saying I'd used the inheritance like a weapon, or that I was cold for not pleading, or that I should have stayed and fought harder for the relationship. Here's my answer to them. I honored the love we had by refusing to let it become an excuse for my own diminishing. My grandmother's secret wasn't an instrument of pain. It was a plank I used to cross into self-respect. If you're listening and you've been cheated on, or you've been the last to know, or you woke up and realized half the people you thought were allies were just comfortable spectators, know this. Betrayal can be a terrible teacher, but it can also be a radical clarifying force. It shows you who values you and who values the idea of you. It strips away the noise until you can hear what matters, your dignity, your dreams, your health, your future. And to the people who stayed silent around me, the friends who liked and scrolled and made a choice not to speak, my forgiveness for that silence is not immediate and it's not performative. It's pragmatic. Some relationships healed, more did not. Some doors I kept open a crack, others I shut for good. Boundaries are part of the work. There were small, delightful ironies along the way. At a party a few months in, a woman I'd known casually asked how things had worked out. I told her, and she raised her eyebrows. "You actually did it," she said, impressed. "You used it to build your life." "Yes," I answered. "I used it to build my life." That felt like the cleanest sentence I'd spoken since the photos. No exclamation, no gloating, just a fact. I chose myself. People ask if I regret keeping the secret from Michael before the photos. Would I do it again? Yes. Not because I wanted to manipulate him, but because I needed to learn the truth about the man I shared my dreams with without allowing my future to be collateral. Secrets have weight. Some crush you when they're used against you. Some free you when they were meant for your own protection. This one did the latter. My grandmother's quiet thriftiness taught me that security is not a car, or a perfume, or a social media endorsement. Security is the ability to decide. She gave me the choice. And when I exercised it, I learned that liberation is better than any petty passport-stamped payback. So what can you take from my story if you're somewhere between disbelief and rebuilding? First, don't let anyone make you feel ridiculous for protecting your future. Second, watch who stays when there's nothing to gain. Third, consider your own measures of freedom. What would it take for you to walk away with your head up? And finally, remember that dignity matters more than a dramatic exit. I know this is heavy, And I know the wound of betrayal isn't fixed by a new house or a business launch. It's healed in pieces. Late-night journaling, therapy sessions, belly laughs with friends who saw me and stayed. It's in the fact that I can now look at that wraparound porch and say, I built this. If anyone listening is wondering about revenge, don't spend your life chasing it. Use what you have to make a life you wouldn't need to boast about. Make things that outlast gossip. Build something that would make your grandmother nod in that slow, approving way she had. That's better than any social media clapback. What would you have done if you were me? Would you have stayed? Would you have left? Tell me below, what would your line have been? I read every comment, and I mean that. If this story hit you, like and subscribe for more. I'll be back with another one soon.